Absolutely honored and delighted to be moderating the panel with the terrific title of Excellence Through Equity. Are we there yet? Because I think that excellence through equity is a wonderful destination, but whether we've arrived at where we've always hoped we should be at this point is is still open for discussion. We are having a discussion this morning with Dr. Judith Gold Stitzel, I'm saying that correctly, I believe, and Carol Welzer Wilkinson. I am Gina Barreca. I have the good fortune of moderating this. I've been down here to be part of the celebration of 125 years of women at University of West Virginia. West Virginia University. I have to say this right. I did this last night. West Virginia University. And I really want to hear from these two remarkable women who made me feel, first of all, at home, and made me feel the strength and the tradition that women have made on this campus, even though when they first arrived, they were not necessarily welcomed on this campus, just as when many women arrived in many places, they were not necessarily welcomed on this campus. But one of the things that I've been struck by just in my bit of time here is what a sense of community the women have through the Women's Center, through the work that women have done, not only at the university, but through the community. And I would love to know how the two of you first met, how you began working together. So Carol, if I could start with you.
A wonderful question that I don't absolutely know the answer to. Of course, I remember the first work we did together, but on a personal level, I don't remember the moment that I first met Judith. I don't know if she remembers when she met me. But others who know me and us will have to help us reconstruct the answer to that question, because it has to have been 1979 or 80 that we first crossed paths, I would think. Do you think so?
When did you first come?
Well, I came to Morgantown with Chris in '76, and then I began working at the Gerontology Center first in '78, and then I was hired at the University Library in '79.
It might have even been at the Gerontology Center, because I did work there with Nancy DeTon. So,
well, that's true.
It might have been even earlier than Women's Studies, which I think is interesting in that even Women's Studies isn't born from nowhere, or maybe particularly Women's Studies isn't born from nowhere, and there might have been a sense of working together on issues of whether we call them social justice then or not. They certainly were. So that's very possible. I mean, it wasn't, we would have crossed paths. We never locked horns, which is good. Mm-hmm. But we certainly walked the same path more closely later on. And so go on and talk a little bit about that.
You're talking about the Gerontology Center just makes me remember that while it wasn't a job for a librarian, I took the job that was offered to me because I wanted to be working. And they called me a research assistant. And right away I said, tell me your research areas. And they said they were focusing on the rural elderly, and I said, well, let's get going and get some background research on the rural elderly. And so we came out with a comprehensive bibliography of the rural elderly fairly soon after that. And I think that might have been my first, it wasn't a hardback or anything, but it was a significant chunk of work, and I was proud of it at the time. And I'm sure Nancy DeTon's work was mentioned in it. So that could have been Judith. So it's a little bit speculative, but we met under wonderful circumstances, whatever it was.
And this, what was the connection through the Women's Center? How did the Women's Center begin?
Well, the Women's Center the Women's Center didn't begin until 1984. The Women's Studies program began in 1980 and came out of the work of the Council for Women's Concerns, which came out of the work of the Women's Caucus, that was a lobbying group that pushed the Faculty Senate to take account of the fact that there was no childcare, that there was there was sexual assault. I've been going over, I don't know if Carol, if you've been doing the same thing, but this morning's panel and this entire symposium has given me an opportunity to look back over the years since I came to Morgantown in 1965. And really, what my first memory of dealing with feminism was somebody coming in the psychology department talking about feminism in a class on women's literature, and I liked everything about what she said, except I wished she hadn't used the word feminism. Why did she have to say that when everything had been going so well? And it was wonderful to find an account of that discomfort. And because it's actually made me, I think, a much better teacher over the years, to remember the moments when we're not yet caught up with ourselves. And in remembering those moments, I think being able to, and it's not a question of tolerating, it's a question of listening carefully and appreciating the different trajectories that we take in the most important women's, not just women's movements, but movements. So, 1980 is when the program began with a halftime coordinator and a halftime secretary. And maybe we'll come back to some of that.
The history that you just outlined is reflected in the display, the exhibit downstairs. I hope you will look at some of the archives that document the history of the caucus to the Council for Women's Concerns to the program and then the center. We pulled as many documents as we could archivally and anecdotally from things that fell out of books that I had in my office, like the pamphlet for one of our programs, and meshed them together in the archives that are from the West Virginia and Regional History Collection. So it's absolutely wonderful that this history happened. And there was talk last night, because Sophie Peterson came, one of the three women who founded the Council for Women's Concerns. Judith was one of the great triumvirate, and then Elaine Mickey Ginsburg of the English department was the third person. And I think we have a document down there that speaks to that. And I guess I want to note that in the history of the Council for Women's Concerns, it still exists today, but its mission is very different than it was when it was first founded. I can't quote you the mission today, but when the triumvirate founded the Council for Women's Concerns, it reported directly to the president and was an organization that was able to go directly to the president with concerns. And in part, that's a really amazing credit to Gene Budig, who was the president at the time, who was very enthusiastic, according to the archives, about having such a thing. He allowed us how he wanted to hear what women were concerned about. And so it happened, and the reporting directly to the president and meeting monthly with the president, as we did when I was chair of the council, doesn't happen anymore. And maybe it's okay, maybe it isn't, but it was really strong structure when you first came up with it.
Well, that leads me to a question I'd like to ask. Do you think that the strength that was so important in terms of putting all of these institutional imperatives into place in the 80s, in the mid-80s, do you feel that now, as in many institutions, certainly I would say my own included, that there's not the same sort of sense of momentum and things have therefore sort of slid back a little bit? Do you feel that there's, you put everything into place, is there still the enthusiasm and the energy to keep women and gender issues, on the front burner where they would have the same sort of meetings and sense of importance in terms of the administration?
I think we are very fortunate right now to have a provost who is a feminist.
Right.
And I think with her work, there's a return to importance. I think we drifted for some years. What do you think?
I don't see particularly that we drifted more than the whole the society drifted. Mm-hmm. So I think I don't feel as much of a gap at any one time. I think one of the strengths, and as I look at the audience too, and I see friends, and I see people, I see Lillian Moore, I see Ann Selinger, I see people from the community who have been kind of continuing presences and productive goads at times that we need that. And I don't remember being one of the 3 people in the Council of Women's Concerns, which
Trust
is
me
interesting.
on
Okay,
this.
but I do see Amelia. I know that I and others, I think, were involved. I think what you need, and one of the things that I found when I look back over these materials over these past years, was a real awareness of the challenges when you're wanting to do radicalizing work within an institution. Again and again, and these are my own personal papers, and I keep journals, so I have scraps of paper, I have typewritten things, but the theme, it really was of such interest to me, was of threading that, or walking that line, not always successfully, even by my own standards, of when to push, when to pull back, when to accept, when to refuse. The title of Gina's talk last night, Courage, Conviction, Curiosity, that courage and conviction. Sometimes it's courage to be quiet even when you're agreeing with people who you feel will not be heard right then. And risking being thought, I found a sentence, do people think I'm becoming a queen bee? I write in my own journal, that I hope not too many, but accept that I was the coordinator of a half-time
You were the center of the
program.
hive. You were the center of the hive.
And that I don't think that goes away. And one of the things I found that really made me laugh just recently is, I don't know when I wrote it, but maybe 20 years ago, maybe. I imagined myself as an old woman, voila, this came to pass, being outside of an institution, doing wildly creative things. The wildly, probably not. Creative, thank God, yes. But this ongoing sense of how do you lead within an institution you're trying to radically change? I think that's a question that maybe during this electoral season we might be asking of our candidates, of whom we want more than they can give. And it was humbling.
Yeah.
But
that's a wonderful line about the queen bee, and I'm glad, thank you very much for mentioning the title, the talk that I gave last night. But I think that curiosity is so much of it. What we've been doing, and with the information, again, the many documents that Carol sent me, were so much about the lives of the women who had come before us here. And I'm just going to read one quotation, if I might. This was from an oral history with Katherine Johnson, sponsored by the National Visionary Leadership Project at the Library of Congress. And it said, "Mom said it was not a friendly environment," said Ms. Joet Hayek, one of Katherine Johnson's 3 daughters, of the math department at WVU in 1940. She recalled a hostile professor who asked her mother what she was doing studying graduate level mathematics. She told him that she was going to be a research mathematician. "Well, what are you going to do until you get that?" he replied, incredulous. She said, "Do the same as you, teach school." Hayek recalled her mother saying, "Wasn't anything he could say to that." And I mean, I just think that that's wonderful. And I think that what I feel like I've learned over these last several days, and what it seems to me that people from both the community and the university have been remarking on, is that sense of, again, sort of continuity through the ages, of finding out that this new generation, or even our generation, weren't the first ones to come up with smart answers to questions when we were asked, "Excuse me, what are you doing here?" Which seems to be the question that women have been faced with for the last 125 years.
Oh my gosh. The "what are you doing here" makes me remember a experience. I was the first librarian to represent the contingent, the group of librarians in the Faculty Senate. And one time I rose in the ranks and got to the executive committee, which was senators from all around the university, and we were assembling for our meeting with the president. So as two of us were there early. One of the people there was a member of the law faculty, and he said to me, "What are you doing here?" Well, I said, "I'm a senator and I'm elected to the executive committee and I'm here to represent all of the senators now." Really, librarians are represented in this way? And I said, yes, indeed. And I wish if I could relive that experience, I said a few other things to him.
None of which can be repeated on tape, okay?
Yes, so it's all for the best that we're taking this. But I'll never forget that experience because it gave me a chance to stick up for my tribe, and to say I was also a citizen of the university now, and I wanted to take on the same issues that he was there for. But he didn't see it as a level playing field, let's just put it that way.
And I think that's part of, again, the discussion that we've had is what do you see as the biggest challenges that you had to overcome personally? We're always, and what we've been struck with, I think, over these past few days at this terrific conference, is how important it's been to hear women's actual stories about what their lives have been like. What in terms of your professional lives has been the biggest? Carol, you just said that you would want to go back and get in a couple of other lines that you had. But if you look back, and again, this isn't one of the questions we prepared, but I'm just asking, if there's some moment that you could go back and give advice to a younger version of yourself, or yourself at a different point in your career, where maybe you didn't have the confidence, you didn't have the courage that you had now, you didn't feel as protected, perhaps, in the community that you are now, what do you wish you could have told yourself? I ask my students to write letters to themselves from when they're 60. What do they think their 60-year-old selves would tell them? And it's all about wishing that they would work harder and yet enjoy themselves more, have more guts, be less shy, be less worried. I mean, is it along those lines, or would it be something else?
This is coming at this at an angle, I guess.
Please.
Because what I do remember as a time that I surprised myself, which can be also, I think, eventually seen as a way of what happens when you can trust yourself and your community, was a time when we had a year-long, not convocation, but there was a year-long study of education at WVU. I think it might have been 1984. Carnegie Commission, led by some, was it Grace Kerr or a big name. Clark Kerr, thank you. I got the C in the K. That's not bad if I'm remembering. It was all male, many males. I mean, it was about a 20-person committee. Studied what the university could do best for the state, also always an important thing for a state university. And when they gave their report, there was not a word about issues of women and economics, even not only women and education, but the purpose was to make this university relevant to West Virginia. And they gave the presentation of these wonderful results at a public hearing to which the community was also invited. And I kept waiting in their report that maybe there would be maybe Lillian was in the audience. She's in the audience.
I want you all to know I was in the audience.
You were in the audience. And I really kept waiting because there was a lot of people up there, and I thought, well, maybe they'd come at it some way, and they'd say, well, of course, maybe it would be a patronizing way, but a way. And when it got to the end, and they said nothing, I don't remember deciding to stand up, but I was standing. And very politely, but very firmly. I really remember that because I had been rehearsing in case it came to that.
Yeah.
I had been writing these remarks in my head, sort of pointed out to them what they were missing, how bad it would be not to consider women for the economics, and wasn't this something that they would want to think about? And the gentleman in charge said, well, that's very fine, thank you, we'll take that into consideration. Won't you please sit down? And I said, no.
Ooh.
And again, didn't think about what it took to say no, but behind me there was only one boo and applause. Many applause. And at that moment, I knew what it felt like to speak for more than your own self, to speak out of a sense of conviction that, I don't know that it came from above, it came from within, but it came knowing that the people had, well, it came with the knowledge that when you do that, there will be people who have your back and who you've moved forward with. And I've never forgotten that.
That's a wonderful story. That's a great story.
May I add something?
Yes, please.
I remember Judith standing. I was a few rows behind. And I remember when you were asked to sit down and you said no, there was a second word from the podium. And actually whoever it was, and it wasn't Clark Kerr who was standing at the time, there was another person. If anyone remembers, the publication that came out of that study was called Revitalizing West Virginia University or something like that. So it was the other person who was leading the charge, so to speak, and he had a further comment. And somehow the subject of removing you bodily came up. And you said, you might have said, someone will have to remove me bodily, or something to that degree. I don't absolutely remember how the exchange went, but there was a second part of it, and it was ridiculous. And at this point, Gordon Gee stood up. He was here in his presidency for the first time. And he said, we do need to consider these issues, or something like that. And he made it clear that we'd all see him in the principal's office later.
Yeah.
Or something like this. And the best he could do in the moment. And I don't know if there was anything that followed up on that, whether you ever got to have a meeting.
I got a letter.
We did look for some archives documenting that, and we couldn't find anything, but they may be there somewhere.
I do have some materials that I could add to that.
Oh, good.
Yes, I do.
That's a good story.
That's a great story.
There are women throughout Morgantown. Help me remember the name of one of the presidents of the Alliance.
Mildred
Of
Bright.
course, Mildred Bright has told me that story 5 times at least, about how she felt so empowered by what Judith said, and how angry she was that women had no place in the document that had come out, or the conversation that was happening that day. And I think it made an impression on all of us, those of us who were clapping for you.
That's I think, a very important story. That's really wonderful. And Judith, you bring up a point about the idea that when many marginalized groups, if we'll just call them, the people who have not been at the center of the inherited seats of power, speak up. And when they tell you now, what are you doing here, or the story that you just told, Carol, that we hear it. And that, again, we often think it's just us, or that we don't have the right to speak up. And that I think of Elizabeth Janeway's definition of power, which is that power is the ability not to have to please. And what they count on is, what people in positions of power count on, is that you will want to please them, that they're going to say, what are you doing here? And that you'll say, I don't even know how I got here. I just got lucky. And that, somebody who says, will you sit down, and you say no, they don't expect that, because they're expecting you to be nice, to be compliant, to be cowed, to be intimidated. And the refusal to be intimidated, and I think, Judith, what you said is that, trying to figure out what that voice comes from, because you realize you're not just speaking for yourself. And it is an astonishing moment of freedom, I think, and of joy, to realize that you're speaking for everybody who might be too scared to have said what needs to be said. And so you have, what Carol said, everybody's got your back, or everybody has your back, is because you're speaking for other people who at that moment are just beginning to find their voice. And I think it's one of the reasons that education is so important is because we help people around us, whether it's at the university or in the community, to help find voices that are dormant, but that we can help bring out, as part of a collective enterprise, and that give people a vocabulary as well as the courage to be able to do it. So it's fascinating to me to hear these stories and these moments, to record these moments of when these things happened. Again, another question that's not on here, but you two are doing well if you're doing.
And I have a follow-up
Oh,
on
please.
the question about looking back
Yes.
at kinds of things, if I may.
Please.
It isn't an easy question because there are several answers, but I think the thing that comes to mind first is that I wish I had spoken out sooner to the cadre of librarians that I work with about being brave about publishing. I have been marginalized since the beginning of my time here for publishing, being a librarian who publishes. You would think we're involved in the ideas of the world and, bringing knowledge to all, that contributing to knowledge is a good thing. I always knew it was, and I had mentors who made me quite clear on the fact that I was, right. But I always wanted to contribute, and in even the smallest ways, I always wanted to turn things into something that would last beyond me. And so I'm very happy to report there's a group of librarians that I unfortunately haven't had time to meet with. I've supported them through email and that sort of thing, but they're looking at publishing and supporting each other now, and that's fantastic. I'm very glad for that. And that started at the law school, and I'm very, very pleased that it's happening, and I hope I will be able to join that group at some time. But the idea that in some ways the power structure of the library and some of the people that I've worked with over the years have discouraged and distanced themselves from things that I have written. And there are things in what I have written that might provide some insights about what we do and that sort of thing. Others feel differently and they, congratulate me. But I wish it has been in the last decade that I have been more able to speak out about this. My publishing started in the early 80s. So, and as a matter of fact, the young man who started the publishing group at the law school said, we have done a literature review of the publishing of the university library community, and wow, you've been at this a long time. Well, I said, I'm so glad you thoroughly did your work and went back that far. But so I want to say there aren't too many librarians here, but to any of you who wish to be part of the public record, please just keep trying and come and talk to me if you want somebody to help you cope with the rejection that you get as you pursue.